Hello everyone. In the recent Gear Lab update, the Fairy Gannet was added to the game, becoming another distinctly Cold War piece of equipment in this World War II anime boat game. And I do mean Cold War, not World War II but entered service after the fact. But it's not the first. The Silkworm missile and Bofors 57mm come to mind. So perhaps it's time we take a look at how the early Cold War could influence Azur Lane going forward. I'm going to be blunt, this topic as a whole disproportionately benefits Azur Lane affiliated factions. Various reparations and restrictions put on the Axis power after losing the Second World War severely hampered their naval ambitions. The Allied powers had two global superpowers, a dying superpower, and a nation that wasn't nearly as limited on its military reconstruction, whereas the Axis had been crushed and limited on what they could do. But with that disclaimer out of the way, let's start with the ships. They are the stars of the show after all. The problem is, we can't really go that far in. Technological advancements made during the Cold War, especially in the maturity of missiles and guided weapons, fundamentally changed the way warships were designed. A modern warship would not want to be within gun range of a BB, or even a cruiser given how lightly armoured they are. They'd get smashed. But their advantage in long-range precision striking would disable, if not outright destroy, any previous ship type before they could get close enough to even dream of doing that. If I'm forced to pick between an Iowa and an Arleigh Burke, I'm going for the Burke. Aegis is fucking scary, man. To be completely honest, as long as they remain primarily gun/torpedo boats, I don't mind when they're from. But if I have to draw an arbitrary line in the sand, I'd say 1955 with an absolute limit of 60 for any stragglers, like the Japanese Ayanami class destroyers. That's when things really began to shift in favour of missiles, and fully stray away from the kind of ships Azur Lane is about. It's also around the time the first nuclear submarines were entering service, which is probably a definitive no. In addition, this is probably going to upset a good chunk of my audience, but no supercarriers. There's no way to properly depict them without making the rest of the hull type bar supports obsolete. Even if they don't get jets, the added effectiveness of the angled flight deck plus their sheer size would make them absurdly above anything else. Maybe make an exception for the United States because it's a weird bomber carrier thing, but no to anything else, as much as we'd love Enterprise and Constellation to Type 2 into their Gigamil forms. In terms of brand new ships, this would give us a solid amount of new options. The Soviets would benefit massively thanks to Stalin's big naval ambitions, especially if we dive into the unbuilt and paper. The Project 24 battleships, cruisers of the Stalingrads, Sverdlov, Project 66, 84 and MLK types, new destroyers and subs, and maybe even a carrier or two. This would be the next big beneficiary of getting access to CV ults for Clemenceau and Foch, plus Colbert and the rebuilt de Grasse and the Type 47 Surcouf class DDs. The US kinda chilled out on shipbuilding during the early years for reasons that can't at all be related to their newfound overwhelming naval supremacy, but they did get about 3 new classes of destroyers and submarines. Japan's similar in terms of new ships, not in reason though. A few classes of indigenous destroyers that really push against my cutoff, and a class of subs. The Brits only built a few new classes of submarines, largely coasting on what they had built or had left to complete from the war. Italy gets a pair of Impetuoso class DDs, and that's about it since the American hand-me-downs are from World War II. China got a few Whiskey class subs from the Soviet Union, but anything indigenous is too late for this video. But that's still better than the Germans, who just barely missed the self-imposed cutoff for a couple new DDs and subs. As far as retrofits go nuts. We already have the Anshans getting their Cold War DDG retrofit. Probably just to give the Chinese something, but within the context of this video, I'm considering it fair game for any other World War II ship to get similar treatment. Like the Cleveland-class Little Rock or Giuseppe Garibaldi, though the latter should probably not get her Polarises. Also, I'd hate to be that guy, but The Iowa retrofits would probably be their Korean / Vietnam upgrades, no Gulf War missiles here. With those listed off, allow us to move on to gear, which is significantly easier. If it's bigger than a destroyer gun, it's fair game, barring a few exceptions like some war-related stuff and the 8-inch Mark 71. Following World War II, large naval artillery fell out of favour, so barring the British 152mm quick-firing Mark V, it's mostly Soviet paper and the Stalingrad gun. There's not a massive amount in the rest either, mostly just American 5-inch cat turrets, Soviet 130mm Patton 57, and the French 127 for DDs. AA has the British mountings for the new UR Cat gun, the French 100mm model from 1935, and the Soviet 76mm AK-726 and 57mm AK-725, and, it gives me great pleasure to announce this, the original Italian 76mm bullet hose, the Ottomalara 76mm Alligator. Planes are a different story. This time frame saw the advent of jets, making a majority of previous combat aircraft rather obsolete as capabilities continued to leap higher and higher. But the first jets had some concerns when it came to carrier applications, so some alternatives were pursued. For jets, I'm skeptical that we'll ever get any, even if some early attempts didn't appreciably improve performance. Again, this was a significant leap in aviation, and the idea of putting naval jets in the same rarity tier, or lower, than the fairy Spearfish is disgusting. That plane had no reason to exist when the Firebrand already did. But I think turboprops are fair game. There's no major departure from how the planes fly, just a different engine type, and hell, we already have a couple in the form of the Wyvern and the Gannet. Both British, interestingly enough. Again, this heavily benefits allied nations, but that was always going to be the case. The former Axis powers didn't get fixed-wing naval aviation again until at least the 80s, if at all. I'm not against getting jets, but it seems the devs have been avoiding them thus far. So that wraps up my baseless speculation on how early Cold War could influence Azur Lane going forwards. What's your take on it? Do you think we'll fully embrace it, or will we just continue to borrow the odd bit of kit that suits us every now and then? Let me know down below, and until next time, fair winds and following seas.